In 2023, Rolling Stone magazine has tried to stir up some controversy, or at least attempted to generate some type of interest with its lists. But interestingly enough, the list that has probably generated the most outrage happens to be the 250 greatest guitarists of all time list, which I recently talked about in my previous video. If you haven't seen it, you can check it out up here. So why, you may ask, am I even commenting on this? Was it the sanctimony of Rolling Stone still claiming to be an authority on music? Or perhaps the irony of such a listless publication producing so many lists? Or maybe a bit of both of those things. But first and foremost, a number of you asked me what I thought about this particular list, so I shared my thoughts. And secondly, to see so many massively influential guitarists with long-spanning careers across a broad array of styles ranked pretty close to the bottom of the list struck me as being very strange indeed. And beyond that, there were even more who weren't acknowledged at all. So rather than giving this publication any more airtime, I'd much rather use this as an opportunity to talk about some of my favorite guitarists who, once again, weren't included on this list. Before we have some more fun jumping into this discussion, make sure to hit the like button down below so we can push the video out to as many people as possible. And if you've been enjoying my videos, make sure to hit the subscribe button and click the bell so you don't miss any of my new playing videos, lesson videos, or discussions much like this one. And if you'd like to learn my approach to soloing and improvising on guitar, join me at bensguitarclub.com. So today we're going to talk about 10 more of my favorite guitarists of all time in no particular order. And obviously there will never be a perfect list, but at the end of the day, music simply can't be boiled down to some type of list. You've just got to enjoy it, and if it makes a personal connection with you, that's what's most important. Make sure to drop a comment down below and let me know who the guitarists are who've made a positive impact on your life. And let's continue this discussion. I'd like to start our discussion today by mentioning the legendary guitarist Tuck Andrus. Tuck Andrus is probably best known as one half of the celebrated duo Tuck and Patty. But outside of Tuck and Patty, I have to say that Tuck Andrus's solo album Reckless Precision from 1990 has to be one of the greatest guitar recordings of all time. Tuck's remarkable command of chord voicings and harmonics, as well as percussive and rhythmic approaches that are very specific to him, make him instantly recognizable. In addition to that, he really knows how to play melodies on guitar so beautifully, and this is a rare skill indeed. I think he's a guitarist that we should all look up to. Now let's talk about Mike Stern. Mike Stern has to have one of the most distinctive guitar styles ever. From his early days with Blood, Sweat and Tears and also Billy Cobham, Mike Stern became far more widely known after appearing on Miles Davis's 1981 comeback album, The Man with the Horn. His solo on the first track of this album, Fat Time, has become legendary amongst guitarists since its release. Of course, Mike Stern has had his own brilliant solo career since the mid-80s, and my favorite pick of his album-wise is Upside Downside from 1986, which was also produced by Hiram Bullock. I was lucky to play regularly at the 55 Bar in New York City for some years, and especially on Monday nights I'd be playing before Mike Stern, so I got to hear Mike live so many times. Mike is a legend and one of the greatest to ever do it. Now let's talk about Tonino Horta. I first discovered Tonino Horta some years ago after reading Pat Metheny referring to him as the Herbie Hancock of guitar. This also led me on a journey to discovering more and more of the brilliant guitarists who've come from Brazil. Aside from his long-running solo career, which continues to this day, Tonino's career took off after recording with Milton Nascimento, which then led to more work with iconic artists like João Bosco and Flora Purim. I strongly suggest you check out Tonino's self-titled album from 1980, as well as Diamond Land from 1988. These are two of the most beautiful albums you're going to hear, with some of the most beautiful guitar playing you're ever going to hear as well. Now let's talk about Tommy Emmanuel. Growing up in the 90s in Australia, as I did, you pretty much couldn't turn a TV on without seeing Tommy Emmanuel showing up somewhere. He was everywhere. Not only was he everywhere, he sounded great, and we all knew how great he sounded. Tommy Emmanuel's had a massive international career for a long time now, and deservedly so. He's one of the greatest guitarists on earth, and really, what more can I say about him that you don't already know? My personal favorite album of his is called Only from 2000, as it reminds me of the kind of playing I would often hear from him on TV growing up in the 90s. You should check it out. Now let's talk about Kazumi Watanabe. Kazumi is a legendary Japanese guitarist who I first heard on an album called Smokin' in the Pit by Steps with Michael Brecker, Mike Maneri, Don Grolnick, Eddie Gomez and Steve Gadd. I was immediately taken by his striking soloing language, and I really loved the fact that it sounded like he was taking a lot of chances, which is such an important part of improvised soloing. I soon found out he had a huge discography in his own right, and a massive career spanning 5 decades. My favorite record of his is called The Spice of Life from 1987, with Bill Bruford and Jeff Berlin. You've got to check it out. Now we're going to talk about another favorite of mine, Paul Jackson Jr. Paul Jackson Jr. is another one of those guitarists who, well, if you don't know his work right off the bat, you've certainly heard him somewhere in the vast history of recorded music upon which he has appeared, as well as a lot of television performances. I first became aware of Paul Jackson Jr. after seeing his name showing up in the credits for George Benson albums, Michael Jackson albums, even Steely Dan. He's played with just about anyone you can think of. He's got to be one of the greatest guitarists in the history of recorded music. You've got to check out Paul Jackson Jr. Now let's talk about someone who I'd consider to be one of my earliest guitar influences, Al Di Meola. He's got to be one of the most influential and virtuosic guitarists in history. Al initially made his mark by joining Chick Corea's band Return to Forever and bursting onto the scene on the Return to Forever album Where Have I Known You Before? Of course, not long after this, he started his own illustrious solo career, which also continues to this day. He's a master of both electric and acoustic instruments, and my favorite album picks of his would be Casino and Kiss My Axe. Now let's talk about Joe Pass. Joe Pass is probably one of the more significant omissions from the Rolling Stone list, but hey, let's not get back into that list again. New York magazine had this to say about Joe Pass. He's called the world's greatest and often compared to Paganini for his virtuosity. There is a certain purity to his sound that makes him stand out easily from other first-rate jazz guitarists. In other words, he was one of the greatest jazz guitar improvisers ever, and more or less defined solo jazz guitar as we know it. A true guitar icon. Now let's talk about Frank Gambale. Frank Gambale has one of the most brilliantly original guitar styles in the history of the instrument. He was initially known for his long association with Chick Corea and also his association with the band Vital Information, but Frank also is most certainly a great artist in his own right. The first time I heard Frank play live was actually in Melbourne in 2007. I heard him play with this great band, Chick Corea, Tel Wilkenfeld, and Antonio Sanchez. I was lucky enough to speak to Frank after this concert, and I asked him if he had any advice for me, and he was really supportive and he told me to dream big. It's a really great memory, and I'll always have such respect for Frank. And last but certainly not least, Jim Hall. Jim Hall is undeniably one of the most influential jazz guitar pioneers, cited by Pat Metheny, John Scofield, Bill Frisell, and so many others as being massively influential. In particular, it's often said that Jim Hall's phrasing changed modern jazz guitar improvisation forever. And I think you can really hear this on the album Undercurrent by Bill Evans and Jim Hall. I also think that Jim Hall's playing is at its very best on an album of his own called These Rooms, which also features the great trumpeter Tom Harrell. You should most certainly check those records out. And that's it. Who did you love to see on this list? Who didn't you see on the list? Make sure to drop a comment below and let me know. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit like down below so that we can push the video out to as many people as possible. And also make sure to hit subscribe down below and click the bell for notifications so you don't miss any of my new playing videos, lesson videos, or discussions much like this one. And if you'd like to learn my approach to improvised soloing on guitar, head to bensguitarclub.com. I certainly mentioned some remarkable guitarists today, and I hope you found this discussion to be useful, and maybe you'll find some new music to check out as a result. Additionally, there are just so many other guitarists across such a broad range of styles who I also could have mentioned who've been hugely influential to me. I mean, it could be anyone from John Petrucci to Paul Gilbert, Yngwie Malmsteen, Tony McAlpine, Scott Henderson, Greg Howe, David Gilmour, not to be confused with David Gilmour of Pink Floyd, who I also love. I could have said Lionel Lueke, I could have said John Abercrombie, Ralph Towner, Steve Kahn, I could have said Elliot Randall, Denny Diaz, Jeff Skunk Baxter, or maybe Jeff McElwain, or Adam Levy, or Shane Terrio, or who else have we got here? Wayne Krantz, Ira Siegel, Lenny Bro, Ed Bickett, Kenny Burrell, Ted Green, Michael Hedges, love the Australian guitarist Ian Moss. So many. The list of musical minds will be endless. So maybe it's time we just stopped with these lists, sat down and enjoyed some music that we can find a personal connection with. I'll see you soon.